everyone, Sparrow here, and I am so excited to present a brand new planetzoo speed build here on the beautiful North American taiga map. Mountains are one of my favorite geographical features, so I thought this would be a great place to start the first of my biome zoo projects. So I've had this idea kicking around for quite some time now, of a string of zoos or sanctuaries or wildlife parks, whatever you want to call them, that feature only the animals that would be found there or close by naturally. So seeing as this zoo is located in the North American taiga, the animals we'll be adding to it will be native to mostly Canada and some parts of the United States. I myself live in Canada, so this seemed like a good, familiar place to start, with animals that are basically in my backyard. Some quite literally. Actually, we had a moose in our backyard just the other day. So as you can see, I'm building a bit of a hill to start with, because I want the main building to sit on top of it and overlook the entire zoo. Making your terraforming look realistic in this game is a challenge. Obviously right now it doesn't look like anything at all, but I always have to remind myself that the beginning stages look terrible, and it really only starts coming together with the details towards the end. So no promises that the terraforming will be all done today. This is going to be an ongoing project as the zoo continues to develop. So you saw me struggling with the world-famous planetzooo pass system there, trying to get one staircase and one ramp down the inside of this building to lead guests out to the ticket gates. I'm gonna be honest, I cut out a lot of footage. What you're seeing today probably took about 15 hours over the course of a few days, but a lot of it was messing around with ideas that didn't end up seeing the light of day, or things not working how I wanted them to, and so on. You know how it goes. If you've played planetzooo for even a few minutes, you know how it goes. If you follow other planetzooo speed builders or have looked into zoo architecture before, you may have guessed what the inspiration for this entrance building was. And if you guessed Akron Zoo, you would be right. There's just something about that tall stone facade and the slanted roofs that I thought fit really well with the style I'm going for in this zoo. You'll be seeing a lot of rock walls, wooden beams, and the occasional glass to modernize the buildings and let light in. I'm imagining the zoo to be somewhere in Alberta, so lots of sunlight year-round, but incredibly cold, windy, and dry in the winter. But anyway, here's our first look at the zoo's logo. I decided on the name True North Sanctuary because of the zoo's location in Canada. True North Strong and Free is part of the national anthem, and Sanctuary because it just sounds nicer than zoo, especially since I'm leaning towards this place being more of a rehabilitation center and just general safe place for animals that might not be able to return to the wild. The mountains and the pines in the logo kind of echo the features of the taiga map that we're building on, and I decided on adding some northern lights above the mountains, so that's why the sky in the logo isn't just one flat shade of blue. But when I was designing the logo, I genuinely didn't even think about how it would be displayed in planetzooo. I just went for a shape that I liked, and then when I started to think about how I would put it into planetzooo, I realized that there's no billboard or object that's shaped like that, and I would have to cover up the parts of the billboard I didn't want to see, or mess around with the image in Photoshop forever to try to get it to match the concrete around it. So the solution was a bunch of rotated concrete panels to fake the rounded edges. And I actually think it worked out quite well, all things considered. Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty happy with it. We'll see if it ages well. But because of the fact that the billboards show images quite a bit lighter in-game, like the exposure on the billboards is higher than the actual image that I put on it, it affected a bunch of the decisions I had already made, like making this building with dark wood. I ended up going with this lighter brown beige color, and I'm loving it so far. We'll see if I end up keeping it. Historically, I'm just a bigger fan of mahogany or walnut rather than lighter colored woods, but yeah, we'll see. And then I reinforced a lot of the corners with metal beams, as well as the detailing on the windows here with the European marquee beams. Just a little bit more of an industrial element. I saw a lot of this in the inspiration photos I used, so it's not completely off base of the style of architecture I'm going for. I did end up using the European marquee beams here, as I mentioned, just because the painted metal beams, even when I painted them black, they weren't as dark as I wanted them to be. So yeah, the Europe pack is actually one I use probably most often. So if you don't already have that DLC, I would highly recommend. I'm actually using the European stone wall piece as a template here, and then sticking faux rock after faux rock after faux rock to it, because I realized that because of my concrete encircled logo on the front wall, I couldn't just use regular stone walls to surround it, and I would have to make my own custom one. So I eventually replaced the wall piece behind the faux rocks with regular old concrete, and once I had my 4 m by 4 m piece nearly filled out, I copied it around a few times in an attempt to make it seamless. I think it actually turned out quite well. It's not entirely seamless. I didn't have to go out of my way to delete pieces though, so I think I'll say that's a success. And then I just had to plaster it all over this big front portion of the building. So this is when I thanked my former self for planning a double wall all around the building, because otherwise I would have had a lot of rock pieces jutting into my interior. Definitely a good building tip. Make sure you build your exterior walls on the outside of the grid squares and the interior walls on the inside of the grid squares. Really useful to have different textures, colors, you name it. And it makes your builds feel more realistic. This is actually when I wished that planetzooo had a lock layers tool. That would be super useful. I was having a really hard time clicking on just the rocks and not the billboard behind it here. Sometimes I just wish you could lock certain objects or layers in place temporarily, just so you can work on top of them more easily. Or maybe I'm just used to working in Illustrator and locking would not actually be useful to most planetzooo creators, but let me know your thoughts if you've made it this far. We're now outlining the logo with these little roof trim pieces to help make it pop out from the rock wall and give it a more defined border. The roof trim pieces, both stone and wood, are some of the smaller pieces in the game, so they're really nice for detail work. Probably some of my favorite pieces in the game. And like with the concrete panels, we're just going to do one side and then flip it around to the other side. A little bit less work, a little bit more efficient. But moving on to the inside, I decided to test each of the colors from the logo on this wall behind the info desk. I believe I ended up going with the mid-tone to bring a little color into the space, but then I covered it with wood cladding from the conservation pack because, well, why not? Honestly, I just like texture. See me. But then I figured I could also use some of the curved cladding pieces to make the desk. Messed around with this for quite a while, but ended up with sort of a leaf shape that I then copied down into a second layer and offset slightly to give it a more 3D wavy effect, kind of tying back to those northern lights. I originally wanted to do this on the wall, but there just wasn't enough space to make it curved. Oh, and gotta grab our angry archer for scaling purposes. There we go. And just like that, a beautiful front desk. To continue this theme of northern lights and mountains, I decided to have the side walls slope down to follow the path through the building. You can see I've already done the other side, but the walls are sort of reminiscent of mountain slopes. Kind of looks like a ski hall now that I'm looking at it. But the slope is also good because generally you don't want too many flat roof sections in Canada because of the amount of snow we get. It just gets really heavy if there's a lot of snowfall, and you'd have to get someone to go up on the roof and shovel it off, especially with the years where there's a lot of snowfall. So with this slope, it should distribute the weight a little bit, and in spring when it melts, it would likely just run off the bottom end. So for the roof, I didn't necessarily want to use metal, but I like the visual texture of this metal clad roof, so that's just what we're gonna go with. Added some skylights for that amazing natural light. In summer, I don't think the sun sets until around 10 p.m, and it's still kind of light out until midnight. Winter is another story, obviously. The sun sets around like 4 in the afternoon, but in some of the northernmost regions of Canada, the sun doesn't rise at all on the winter solstice, so at least there's some daylight where I'm imagining this zoo to be. I would never be able to move that far north. Just the seasonal depression would get to me for sure. But pro building tip, since I'm working on the roof here, I always make my roof in a separate group so I can move it up and away from the building. Really helps if you like to jump around your build like I do and want to go back in to do the interiors later. I know a lot of people do roofs last, but I just find roofs hard and I like to get them out of the way as soon as possible. Since I apparently hadn't had enough of my custom rock wall earlier, and also because I didn't think the wood going all the way to the ground looked realistic, almost like it needed some sort of foundation, I copied my panels across to ground the building a little bit better. Definitely makes the building look more interesting rather than just the full wood walls. A lot of this will get covered up with foliage anyway, but a strong foundation is important, so why not? So while I continue with more detail work, namely making doors, let's actually chat about the animals that I'll be putting in this zoo. Speaking of animals, my cat is looking super cute over there, right? Yeah. So this zoo is actually the first of 6 zoos I have planned. I basically went through the entire animal list and divided the animals up by continent or biome, taking some liberties here and there. So I have this North American taiga zoo planned, a zoo that will either be in Mexico or South America, featuring animals from warmer regions of North America, Central America, and all of South America. A European zoo, an African zoo, a zoo in Asia, and a zoo in Australia. So the reason for splitting the animals of North America between this zoo and another zoo is, well, I just didn't think a wildlife reserve that houses, say, a polar bear would also have alligators or monkeys. So True North is going to be featuring animals from the Arctic regions of Canada, boreal forests, mountains, maybe some prairie-dwelling animals, just to even out the animal count. We really don't have that many animals in Planet Zoo that can be found in Canada. There's a much better representation of African and Asian animals, which, to be fair, there's definitely less biodiversity in Canada because of how stupidly cold it is in the winter. We're going to switch gears and work on the indoor water feature here. So it's a good thing I had my roof in a separate group, because this way we could just move it out of the way, and now it's not in our way while we're working on the interior. Water placement is another thing I really struggle with in Planet Zoo. Water, paths, and roofs. My 3 worst enemies, apparently. Since I wanted some variety and didn't want to bother with the custom rock walls for the fountain, we're going to use the dry stone wall, I believe, as the border for the water instead. A little bit darker, more tiger rock feeling. Still had to mess around with various rotations to get the outline I wanted. While I do really like the grid pieces, because they're super coordinated and nice and straight and organized, which I love, sometimes they drive me nuts and I just have to build everything using panel pieces. So much more flexibility with the 3-way rotation, which also has its pros and cons, but you can customize things a lot more, I think. One thing I kind of wish we did have in-game is little fish to put in water features like this. Or small aquariums. Or even koi ponds. I feel like a lot of zoos have those. A lot of botanical gardens have those for sure, and I know a lot of people love building gardens in Planet Zoo as well. This ladder is off the workshop, by the way. I'll have a link in the description to all workshop items that get used in True North, because having worked as a graphic designer, giving credit for work is super important, so I will always try to shout out items and creators when I use workshop items. So far, I believe this is the only one, but I'm sure there will be many more because there are so many awesome things on the Planet Zoo workshop. Like, it actually blows my mind how creative people are. And the fonts you can find on the workshop, like, just absolutely incredible. Gonna plant up the side of this waterfall with some greenery so it doesn't look completely empty. This was my first time looking through the plants I filtered here, so bear with me. I will eventually have my own filters for the trees and undergrowth I'll be using consistently throughout this build, but today is not yet that day. I do find it is easier, and it also looks better, when you have a more limited palette for your greenery. I can see a lot of the exterior planting being limited to evergreens, combinations of brambles, bracken, ferns, probably nettles for the undergrowth. That fluffy greenery that fills in the gaps and makes the forest floor come to life. Foxgloves are another gorgeous flower, but they might have a little bit of difficulty surviving outdoors in minus 50 degrees Celsius, so we're gonna keep them inside just in case. And yeah, then it's just filling in the gaps. Don't want too much of that mulch showing. I was very proud of these little nettles I placed at the end, especially that one near the broken birch trunk on the waterfall, which you'll see in just a second here. Made that background concrete wall the light blue of our logo to give the illusion of sky behind the trees, and then it's on to the floor. I've kept the paths gravel for now because I like the gray curb on the ramp and stairs. It matches the rest of the concrete really well, but jury is still out on whether or not I'll be keeping them. Let me know your thoughts below. I could probably just cover everything in concrete if need be. Just like so. Gotta fill in all of those ugly gaps. You can tell I'm slowly becoming happier with the way it's looking because of the way I'm checking it out from all angles. Since I jump around from big ticket items to details so often during builds, it's incredibly satisfying to reach a point where it's starting to look like a fully formed project. But jumping around means I don't get bored as quickly or use up all of my brain power on one tiny detail. I find it helps to swap from big picture to details every so often. I burn out a lot more slowly. Like here, we went from garden bed border to concrete plaza. The reason for the checkerboard is so every concrete piece isn't facing the same direction, and then there's some variation in the texture. Keeps it looking like the same pattern from further away. And now all that's left to do is plant up the outside of our building. Some larger trees and bushes with plenty of arrowwood and bramble bushes, bracken, ferns, nettle, etc. I have a big rose bush out front here, but I'm pretty sure that gets replaced with a hawthorn bush, as you'll see in the cinematics. Just wasn't working, not the silhouette I was looking for. Plus, roses are difficult to grow outdoors in Alberta, so why make life more difficult for our staff, who are ultimately the ones who are going to be taking care of these beautiful flower beds. Yeah, so as we're closing in on these final touches, wow, I can't believe I've just talked for over 16 minutes. If you're still here, thank you for hanging out with me. Let me know if you liked the pace of this speed build. I think I sped it up to 750% of the original. If you wish I hadn't cut out so much, maybe, if you have any tips or changes you might make to the build, I'm all ears. Yeah, thank you again. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see the continuation of this build. And while we're at it, any guesses as to which animals I plan on introducing first? I have a few in mind. Let me know down below. Before we get to the cinematics, which were actually shot before the newest update, so apologies for the lack of scenic camera movements, here's the actual ticket entrances to the zoo, and that's where we'll be leaving off today, if the paths work properly. Oh, yep. There they are. Here's a shot from the overhead drone camera of everything we did today. Thanks again for stopping by, and hope to see you next time at True North Sanctuary. Bye!